Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Delano D'Souza. Coming up, Pakistan positions itself as a mediator to end the war in Iran. Islamabad confirms its role in back-channel negotiations between the US and the Islamic Republic. The fallout from the war in the Middle East continues to spread in Asia, the Philippines declaring an energy emergency as Manila feels the squeeze from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And multiple generic weight loss drugs now on the market in India after the patent behind Novo Nordisk's Wegovy and Ozempic expires. Pakistan says it stands ready to host talks to bring an end to the conflict in Iran. Islamabad confirms it's been working behind the scenes, passing messages between the Islamic Republic and the United States. Over the past month, Pakistan has walked a diplomatic tightrope over the war. After Iran's supreme leader was taken out, a lightly worded statement expressing concern was issued. This while inside the country, frustrations were mounting with protests in multiple cities and fatalities reported outside the U.S. consulate in Karachi. We can now bring in Michael Kugelman, resident senior fellow for South Asia at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Islamabad has never been a hub for diplomacy. So how did Pakistan suddenly position itself as a mediator? And is it all about geography?
Right. It indeed has been a surprising development for many observers. One reason being that Pakistan has a very deep alliance with Saudi Arabia, Iran's chief rival, suggesting that Iran would not believe Pakistan to be a credible neutral player. But indeed, here we are. I think it comes down to several factors, but one being something very simple. Pakistan is one of the few countries that has warm relations with both the U.S. and Iran. And again, that might seem hard to believe. Just a few years ago, Pakistan's relations with the U.S. were shaky, and Pakistan, just over 2 years ago, actually fought a brief border conflict with Iran. But over the last year, things have been very different, and we have seen Pakistan carry out a number of high-level engagements with the Americans and the Iranians, including meetings that both the Pakistan Army chief, who's the most powerful figure in Pakistan, and the Pakistani prime minister have had with both the U.S. and Iranian presidents. And some of these engagements have focused specifically on Iran mediation issues. So essentially, Pakistan has been able to leverage what have been very warm ties with both the Iranian and American sides.
You mentioned the warm ties with the United States. I mean, Donald Trump calls General Munir his favorite field marshal. Islamabad has nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know if that still stands now. They're on his Gaza Board of Peace. But where is the relationship with Israel?
If we want to talk about how effective Pakistan's mediation efforts could be, there are a number of reasons why they might not be successful ultimately. But indeed, one reason is the fact that Pakistan does not have formal relations with Israel. Though I would argue that the way these mediation efforts have played out, they're very much focused on the U.S. and Iran. Israel, I think, has very different objectives and war aims than the U.S. does. I suspect that the U.S. has a much greater interest in backing out of this war before Israel does. So as I see things, Israel is not a part of this storyline, and Pakistan's efforts are focused specifically on mediation efforts with the Americans and the Iranians.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia's the mutual defense agreement which Pakistan has with Saudi Arabia. Riyadh, for now, has not taken an offensive posture in the war. But if that were to happen, does Pakistan automatically get dragged into this conflict, and so the theater of war expands very quickly?
I mean, I would argue that this mutual defense pact is another reason why we've seen Pakistan become so active in mediation efforts. Yes, Pakistan has this pact with Saudi Arabia, but Pakistan doesn't want to have to be in the position where it has to decide whether to invoke it or not. And that is because Pakistan badly wants to avoid getting dragged into this war. So indeed, if the Saudis continue to get hit by Iran, then there is a possibility that Pakistan could be pressured to invoke it. But this is exactly why Pakistan wants to do whatever it can to move the needle forward toward de-escalation so that Iran is not inclined to carry out more attacks on Saudi Arabia. Again, I emphasize this. I mean, Pakistan badly wants to avoid getting dragged into this war. It would much better be involved in de-escalation and mediation efforts than any type of scenario where it could be forced into a conflict when it is already bogged down in a conflict with Afghanistan and when it's dealing with a hot border with India, as well as surging terrorism concerns in Pakistan as well.
Because if it is dragged into this war, then does it risk domestic unrest, considering that Pakistan has the second largest Shia population in the world? Some 10 to 15% of the country is Shia.
Yeah, that absolutely that factor, and also just pure geography. Pakistan does border Iran to the east. Pakistan is literally on the doorstep of this war in the Middle East, and so that means that the conflict spillover risks for Pakistan would be particularly acute, given that the border between Iran and Pakistan has at times been volatile. And I noted before there was a brief border conflict several years ago when Iran carried out cross-border strikes on anti-Iran militants based in Pakistan, and Pakistan retaliated. You have a number of militant groups along the border that could be emboldened by a conflict in the Middle East in which Pakistan is dragged into it. And that's the last thing that Pakistan would want to have to deal with now at a moment when the country on the whole is facing surging levels of militancy, particularly in the northwest near the border with Afghanistan.
Donald Trump called India's Narendra Modi after it surfaced that Pakistan was playing a mediator role. Delhi seems to have brushed this aside, but do you think it's ruffling feathers at all?
Well, I mean, India's external affairs minister made a very critical comment about Pakistan, one that did not go down well well, certainly among the critics of the Indian government, but among others, essentially mocking Pakistan for its mediation efforts. I think that certainly there has been some anxiety in New Delhi. In the sense that Pakistan has been front and center. It's really getting a lot of positive global headlines. And what India is always looking to do is to undercut its rival Pakistan on the global stage. And here, indeed, India has been very quiet, whereas Pakistan has been very active in these mediation efforts, getting this prestige status as one of the very few small number of countries that's played the role of a go-between. But I'd say this: if you step away from the zero-sum approach to India-Pakistan rivalry and suggest that, okay, Pakistan's gain is India's loss, if you get away from that, I think it's important just to acknowledge that India has a very strong interest in this war coming to an end. I mean, India has many of the same concerns that Pakistan and other countries do. You're talking about the risks to energy security. India is very dependent on energy imports from the Middle East. India has several million expatriates in the broader Middle East. And so one would argue that India actually would benefit from efforts by Pakistan or any other mediator to help de-escalate the conflict.
But given all those reasons, are you surprised that India didn't put its hat in the ring to be a mediator?
I'm not. First of all, I mean, India's relations with the U.S. and Iran are okay, but as you know, the last year has been surprisingly shaky for relations between the Americans and the Indians. Things have stabilized a bit, but they're still a bit precarious. And then when it comes to India's relationship with Iran, yeah, historically it's been fairly warm, but if you look at what's happened over the last year or so, it's been a bit shaky. I mean, early on in the war, there was an Iranian sub that was, an Iranian ship that was sunk by a U.S. sub off Sri Lanka that had just been participating in an Indian naval exercise. That did not really go down well in Iran. And, India has really reduced its commercial cooperation with Iran in recent years. It reduced drastically its imports of Iranian oil, mainly because of U.S. sanctions risks, and made a significant Indian investment in the port in Chabahar in southern Iran. That's really slowed down because of U.S. sanctions. So it's a bit shaky. So I think in that sense, India, from a geopolitical perspective, might not have been the best fit. And the other key factor is that India, unlike Pakistan, it takes a very cautious diplomatic approach, and it's not going to proactively pitch itself as a mediator unless it is formally asked to be so by the warring parties, and that clearly would not have happened in this case.
Michael Kugelman, thank you for joining us on the program today. The ongoing war in the Middle East has huge implications for Asia, with the Strait of Hormuz still shut. Over in the Philippines, authorities were forced to declare a state of energy emergency, as Gabrielle Nadler now reports.
Joseph Arinian has worked as a jeepney driver in Manila for 32 years. The profession that once supported the father of five's whole family is now barely covering expenses amid soaring fuel prices.
It's overwhelming. It's a lot to deal with because tomorrow you'll never know how to adjust the money that you earn. Our earnings keep shrinking.
The Iran war and effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz have severely disrupted Asia's oil supply. The Philippines, which imports 90% of its oil from the Middle East, is especially vulnerable. Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. declared a state of national energy emergency on Tuesday due to what the administration said was an imminent danger posed by low energy supply.
I want to assure everyone that this does not mean that we should panic. It is a precautionary tool so that we are ready for whatever comes next.
The Department of Energy has been ordered to take measures to conserve energy and prevent hoarding. The Department of Transportation can also take actions, including subsidizing fuel and commuter fares.
The longer the crisis goes, the deeper it will be, and it's quite likely that other countries within the Southeast Asia region could likely follow suit.
Still, transport workers began a 2-day strike on Thursday, protesting what they say is the Marcos administration's failure to respond swiftly. Labor activists are also calling on the government to raise minimum wages, arguing the emergency response won't help regular workers.
As many as 50 generic versions of blockbuster weight loss drugs Ozempic and Wegovy could come onto the market in India. This after the expiry of a key patent. While analysts predict the market for such drugs could reach $1 billion domestically, India's health ministry is warning against unregulated use. Antonio Kerrigan reports.
At this Mumbai clinic, 10 to 12 patients per day come in asking for weight loss injections. But monthly dosages costing between $150 and $230 have held back the tide of the semaglutide boom until now.
So yes, the cost factor can be a deterrent to certain patients, and especially the ones who are kind of thinking about it, whether or not they should go in for that.
Since the Indian patent expired on the active ingredient of Ozempic, alternatives have already hit the market at just $15 per month. And this is just the beginning.
What we have or we understand is there will be more than 50 brands that will be launched in the market, and there are more than 40 players who will be launching these drugs.
The world's most populous country still accounts for a third of the world's malnutrition, according to the WHO. But India is also in the grip of an obesity epidemic, with 24% of women and 23% of men overweight or obese.
While in first world countries, the more the money, they become more active and devote time for their health. While this is reverse in India. They become sedentary, put on weight.
And as patents are set to expire in other countries over the course of the year, the Indian pharmaceutical powerhouse could supply international markets too, despite continued fears in the medical community about potential misuse of what was initially created as a treatment for diabetes.
That's it for this edition of Access Asia. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.